Hello and welcome to a special foreign policy virtual dialogue on how to stop fake news. My name is Ravi Agrawal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, and it's my pleasure to be your host for the next hour. Now, what is fake news? News that is untrue or not real. But there are many who dispute its effectiveness as a term. Journalists, for example, can liken it to a slur because it discredits their position as truth tellers. But what is clear is that it's a term that has caught on, for better or worse, and it includes everything from misleading content to news that is false, manipulated, or fabricated. Fake news is also not new. It's age-old. It's as old as news itself. But the reason why it's especially prevalent now, and the reason why we're assembled here today, is because of the way in which the internet and social media have created platforms to amplify information instantaneously and globally. That is relatively new. And that means that we need to find new and improved ways to deal with the problem. I have some terrific guests today to help us figure out solutions today. And they include representatives from the European Commission. Europe, of course, has been at the forefront of tech regulation. Top academics from Northwestern University, the co-founder of StopFakeorg, and a top representative from Facebook, the world's biggest social media company. A big thank you to Northwestern University's Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs for helping us make this event possible. So before we begin, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We want to be sure that we can hear from you, our audience. We have many hundreds of people, thousands in fact, I think today, tuned in on Zoom as well as watching our live streams on social media. We've reserved a portion of this event for questions from them, from you, from our global audience. Here's how to get in touch. If you're on Zoom, it's easy. Click on the Q&A button and submit your questions. Tell us where you're writing from, your name, and if you're joining us on the phone or watching the live stream, you can email us your questions. The address for that is events@foreignpolicy.com. Of course, we encourage you to chime in on social media. Be sure to use the hashtag #HowToStopFakeNews. Okay, let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova. She has been at the helm of the EU's efforts to curb the spread of misinformation, to figure out how best to regulate tech companies, and to help enforce accuracy and transparency across digital media platforms. Vice President Jourova, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you. Thank you for being with us. Now, all of the people tuning in today on social platforms have at some point come across fake news. Many of us have even been fooled by it. So I thought we'd just begin with the scope of the problem from your vantage point. How big is the world's fake news problem and why is it important?
Well, as you said, this is a problem which we all encountered. We have all been confronted by fake news, and it's not new, but the new thing is that we see it and we are influenced by that. Yeah, it started to do some big work in our society, and it can be dangerous. So what to do? I have here a comment that there was enough analysis, so we need to regulate. And this is what in the EU we are quite good at. Remember GDPR, so we are now continuing work on the digital space, not with the intention to somehow squeeze it or to hinder the development of digital technologies and digital space by overregulation, but we simply want to introduce the rules which will make internet safer, maybe more decent place, which will make internet the place where you will reach the trustworthy information.
And I would love to push you a little bit on what kinds of regulations you might have in mind for details. But before I do that, Vice President Jourova, I just wanted to touch on one story that's been in the news this week, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the fact that several governments have stopped the administration of the AZ vaccine based on essentially unscientific allegations that it causes blood clots. Now, obviously, this is politics, and we don't need to get into the politics, but that it's such a good example this week of something that underscores the role of rumors and fears and fake news in a way that really impacts all of our lives.
Yeah, thank you for this question. What to do about that? And I will come back in a minute to AstraZeneca. Well, fighting against fake news and lying, I think that it is the best thing is to do is to promote the truth and defend the facts. And this is exactly what we try to do now in COVID time. In our strategy against disinformation, we differentiate COVID and non-COVID time. Mm-hmm. So in COVID time, we require the authorities of health sector to defend their facts and communicate widely so that the people have first-hand trustworthy and reliable information. We ask the platforms like Facebook, Google, TikTok, several others to enable them to use prominent place in their system so that the people can see it first. And then, of course, they can see the avalanche of different fake news where we want the platforms to detect, with the help of the authorities for health, to detect those fake news which are dangerous to health of people and to remove it. And that's the difference between COVID measures, which can end up in removal of the content, and non-COVID time, because for non-COVID normal kind of time, we never wanted the content to be removed. We always wanted to have more intensive fact-checking, the work of professional journalists, also to be paid when their work is used online, when they work outside the systems. We are focusing on foreign interference, where it is very serious and necessary to act and not to be passive. So we are now considering some sanctions targeting to the foreign powers which are overflooding our internet European space by toxic propaganda and fake news, which are also dangerous now in COVID time. And we don't want to introduce any kind of censorship in the EU. So believe me, it would be a great end of my career to become the commissioner of the truth. But I myself lived in a regime in Czechoslovakia where we had the Minister of Information. It was the main censor. I promise this will not be established in the EU. So we have to find other ways. So it will be partly regulation, but very soft touch, mainly self-regulation, which means the code of practice against disinformation, which we are now upgrading, more investments into fact-checking and cleaning up. Yeah, because we don't want to remove, we want to add the facts. For me, what happened in US when Twitter labeled Mr. Trump's declarations about the correspondence elections, do you remember? I kind of appraised that approach because it was the competition of speeches. They added facts. Yeah, it was not censoring.
But do you think that was too little, too late?
I think it was an appropriate reaction. But what I don't like on this system, that Twitter bosses or Facebook bosses will decide what to do ad hoc. This is not a sustainable situation or sustainable system. That's why in Europe we are coming with the rules. Back to AstraZeneca, of course, these are exactly the kinds of rumors which are not only pushing the public opinion, but they are changing the decision making in the highest political levels. But with AstraZeneca, we have to correct it. We are waiting for the opinion of the European Medicine Agency. which is due today. I didn't have time to follow what's happening, but I think that maybe now already we have the opinion. And in COVID time, the politicians should follow the advice of the experts, and rather than what the public opinion says. Yeah,
Absolutely, and all the more
cannot
reason
afford
given.
populism in this time.
Exactly. And I should just point out, I'm especially thankful you're here, given all the important things on your plate. I mean, the thing about rumors, and this is what makes it so dangerous, as you mentioned about populism, is that, when people believe something, whether leaders believe it or not is irrelevant, because their fears, the fear of people, is a very powerful tool that then ends up influencing policy. And I wanted to get into your personal story as well, which I think is so powerful of your experience with real disinformation from the state. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and how it sort of give us a sense of how that shapes your perspective in terms of the importance of truth and how best to ensure that it gets out there.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. It's a bit, I don't know if it will enrich you, because I wanted to maybe speak more about what we plan in EU, but I'm grateful for this question, because in fact, by the way, the people believe what they want to believe. And of course, there is also that effect of when they are fearful.
That's right.
That they are prone to believe everything which is apocalyptic, or the conspiracy theories and so on. I grew up in a very strange system where the only doctrine was dictated. And my father used to tell me, never believe what they write in the newspaper. So then the revolution came in 1989, and I have on my wall the former Czech president Václav Havel, whose slogan was that truth and love must win over hatred and lie. And suddenly the whole mindset of the society and of the individuals started to change. And it is a great moment for me that now I work in this field of disinformation and what is true and what is lie, because I am extremely careful not to introduce any kind of censorship. And it's an interesting European story. Whoever I speak to from the Central or Eastern Europe, the people understand well that we must not set up the ministries of truth or the Commission of Truth. This morning, I had a very good debate about that with the Prime Minister of Romania. When I speak to the politicians, prime ministers, for instance, from the Baltic Sea countries, who are very close to Russia, well, they all understand that this is the experience which has to translate into the proper approach to disinformation in the EU. The more you go to the West, the more you hear, well, there should be some digital police, there should be some authorities which will say what is right, what is wrong. And I'm quite glad. I find it a symbolic thing for me that I am now in this job when we are setting up the rules for the future. The other thing is for illegal content. Yeah, we make a difference. We are differentiating between illegal content, which is terrorism, extremism, hate speech, and child pornography and child abusive material. These are the kinds of content which are prohibited now in the EU by the laws, by the criminal laws. And it has to be fully respected, offline and online as well. And here comes our new regulation. We have the Digital Services Act adopted by the Commission. It has to be adopted also by the European Parliament and the member states. This is our rather complex legislative process. where we say clearly illegal content has to be removed.
So let me push you on that, Vice President Jourova. I think this is a good moment to get into regulation now. And thank you for sharing your story as well. I think it says so much about you and your work. But on the regulation front, and specifically about fake news, since that's why we're here today, what kinds of regulations would really help? Because, you know, one analogy to use is that this is like a game of whack-a-mole. You can stop some of it, but you know, fake news always finds a way to crop up again in some other form on some other platform. So what rules do you think the EC could pioneer or put in place to really sort of fix this longer term?
I will try to explain that in a simple way. We have adopted the Digital Services Act, which seeks to increase responsibility of the platforms, which is coming with special strong responsibility for the big ones, which cover more than 10% of the European citizens. Yeah, we speak here about American established companies, but they are global companies. So let's face this fact that it requires maybe tougher approach. We have a representative of Facebook here for the debate, so you will hear the reflection. This regulation says there should be increased responsibility for the content. There should be more transparency about how the algorithms work. The algorithms should be auditable. So we will require to know how they work, how the bubble has been created. We will increase the level of oversight. So indeed, we are creating a structure similar to structure we use for GDPR oversight and enforcement.
And I have to ask, are tech companies responsive to this? I mean, are you able to enforce these kinds of regulations?
Yes, we, of course, this is why we are doing that. We need legally binding rules, because we have a lot of gentleman agreements, and I appraise the cooperation with the big tech, because more or less they are fulfilling what they commit themselves to do under the different codes, code of practice, code of content, code of simply code against the hate speech. And we were designing the rules together with them and with the member states and with the academia, because this requires multiple angle approach. Yeah. So what I hear from the big tech is relating to the product of the Commission, this Digital Services Act. What I hear, it could have been much worse, but the legislative process is not at the end. It's just the start. And I know that especially in the European Parliament, there are many members who have really big appetite to go for tougher solutions, and especially the appetite to kind of change the practice of algorithms. And they want to go farther also in how it should be overseen and enforced. So we will see. I will defend the position of the Commission unless at the last trialogue there might be some compromise done.
But let me ask you this,
but let me explain it in full. Sorry. This Digital Services Act sets the general rules, mainly on illegal content. For disinformation, we want to continue the self-regulatory approach. So we are upgrading the code of practice against disinformation. And after the Digital Services Act will come into force, which might be in 3 years, let's be realistic. Yeah, the process will take some time. Then this code of practice will be seen as the measure to mitigate the risks of having the disinformation which is endangering the peaceful societal development and democracy and security and so on. I hope it was understood. So that's the combination of regulation.
That makes a lot of sense. But let me push you on this, because what you're suggesting is that Europe would create one set of laws, but doesn't that then create the danger of a splinter net where companies can share some aspect of their algorithm with you in Europe, but not, for example, in China or not in India or not in other parts of the world? Does that then create separate, ecosystems where you have one set of rules for Europe and another set of rules for the rest of the world? And how are you dealing with that?
Well, first of all, we are, I think we desperately need global solutions. And inevitably, there will be dual approach, because we have democratic world and we have non-democratic world. Yeah. And some powerful actors on the side of the non-democratic world. So I would really like, and this is shared by my colleagues and by Margaret Vestager, who is our main figure in the Commission dealing with the digital matters. We really want to open a good and broad debate with the United States about some global standards. And we want it for the protection of private data, because GDPR should not be the sole lonely sheriff. It was meant to be a global standard, and it is being followed by many states. Just to mention Japan, and also we are in talks with India and South Korea, Canada. So we want to establish the conditions for work on the global standards also, as far as with regard to legality of internet, so that we are not globally dependent on whether Mr. Zuckerberg had a good sleep that night. Yeah, because
that's right. And we have a representative from Facebook who we will put that question to later.
I wish him good sleep, but I think that we need to take back the power. This is incredible. This has developed. It went too far, and when I speak to, I sometimes call them digital gods, with the big managers of big tech, I sometimes hear that they are telling me, well, it went too far. We just wanted to do a good business, and suddenly we are a kind of governing the world. Take it back, give us the rules. And this is what I hear. This is what Mark Zuckerberg said in the Congress, I think, last year. Yeah, give us the rules. And also he asked there, do you really want us to be the arbiters of the truth? It was an interesting debate in American Congress, in the country where the freedom of expression has no limits, according to the First Amendment of the Constitution. Yeah. So we are developing everywhere.
Indeed. Vice President Jourova, we're out of time, and I know you also have to run. I just want to quickly name check a couple of viewer questions that have come in for you. A lot of people excited to hear from you. There's Lana Rinjulia, who asks if Russian propaganda and fake news is taken very seriously in Europe. I assume the answer is yes. Stephen Jones is asking how the EU is responding to attacks on the free press in Poland and Hungary. Just quick thoughts from you before we let you go.
Russian propaganda, yes, it is taken more and more seriously. We have thousands of pieces of evidence. We have experts working on it, and we are considering with Joseph Borrell, our High Representative for Foreign Affairs, that we will take actions. It could be even the form of sanctions, because we already use this method when it comes to cyber attacks. And we might follow this method also still this year. This is too serious just to remain passive. And again, a little bit geographical insight. There were times when the West did not believe the East. that Russian propaganda is a masterpiece. They know how to do that. They even do not hide that disinformation belongs to their military doctrine. So we could not be passive and not do anything. So we are increasing capacities. We are detecting the dangerous disinformation. We take different actions, which I would not like to reveal because it is the work of the whole network. When I say we, I don't mean the Commission. I mean the network we have through all the member states. And this is a very valuable network, which is bringing fruits. The EU is not responsible for a hardening situation in media sphere in Poland and Hungary. And believe me, we are worried about that. We are worried about the pressure on media, about the economic and political pressure. We are worried about the worsening security of journalists. And we have very weak tools, legally speaking, to do something big. But I am using all the tools available. And I want to do more next year, because I believe that we are making a mistake, because we are treating media as any other business as usual. And this is how we have our EU rules designed. Yeah, we don't have any special tools to protect media in the EU. And it's a brutal mistake. Media play a special role in democratic society. We are not equipped to protect them. That's why we are now designing some new possible tools to improve that.
Vice President Jourov, as a journalist, I can tell you your words will be music to the ears of many people in the media. Thank you for your time. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I really appreciate your time and your insights on this topic. And I know our audience will look forward to following how the EU will continue to address these challenges surrounding mis and disinformation. So thank you once again, President.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Have a good day to everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring in our panelists representing academia, the media, and big tech. But first, I want to welcome our next speaker, Annelies Riles, who heads Northwestern University's Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs. Annelies, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
There you go, I can see you. Annelies, tell us why stopping the spread of fake news is important for your organization.
Well, the mission of Northwestern Buffett, the Northwestern University Roberta Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, is to bring the best thinkers together across nations, across professions, across disciplines, to find rigorous scientific answers to those big global challenges, problems like climate change and poverty and nuclear weapons proliferation. And we can't begin to address any of those problems from a foundation of misinformation or even public lack of trust in information. And as an international lawyer, Ravi, I'll say that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the global media is now a node of global governance on par with the traditional nodes like international institutions, international law, and state-to-state diplomacy. You only have to look at the power of Twitter globally over the last 5 years to see that. And so we heard Vice President Jourov just mention that the legal tools at the international level are very weak, but there are other tools perhaps in the technology that we can develop together at the intersection of corporates and universities and governments that are powerful. And this is an area of focus and expertise for us at Northwestern. Of course, we have our world-renowned Medill School of Journalism, our communication school with its expertise in digital technologies, our university campus in Qatar focusing on global media in the global south, work being done on AI around media and engineering, and on telecom regulation in the law school. So we think we can be part of the solution here. And we see this as a technological problem, but also a cultural problem. It's a problem of economics, but it's also a problem of ethics. And solving this problem is going to require something really hard, which is bringing together the scientists and the engineers and the creatives and the lawyers and frankly, the global experts, because this, as Vice President Jourov suggested, is a very difficult problem to solve at the national level. Digital borders are hard to maintain. And the local expertise is necessary because what works in the Ukraine may not work in Ethiopia or in Hong Kong. So we think there are also exciting experiments emerging in different parts of the world. Taiwan is an example to me of real innovation here that we should look at, that we might want to elevate.
Can you expand on that a little bit? I'm curious what you like. How, in what way has Taiwan been a beacon?
Well, Taiwan has been, had a lot of experience with disinformation campaigns coming from China. And so there's already a lot of sophistication among the public, I should say, to start with about this. But they've been very committed to exactly the question that Vice President Jourova mentioned, which is how to maintain an open democratic process while giving the public the tools they need to critically evaluate what they are hearing. And they have set up a different kind of ministry of information that is not at all about banning or promoting particular points of view, but really about empowering the population to monitor and respond for itself. So we think these are all exciting initiatives, and that we're hoping that we can be a node where we field global cross-disciplinary teams to elevate those solutions and bring the parties together to find ways to face this challenge.
Fantastic, and I hope this discussion is one part of that, one node in this wider network. Annalise, I'm going to say thank you for now. I'm going to bring you back later because we're getting a lot of questions from our viewers around the world, and I'd love for you to come back and help us think through some of them. That's going to be in about 20 minutes at the end of the hour. Keep sending in your questions through the Zoom platform or an email to events@foreignpolicy.com. and I will put them to our panelists. But I want to bring them in now so we can get that part of the discussion started, and I'll try and weave in your questions as we go along. So let's bring in our guests. I've got Olga Yurkova, she's the co-founder of StopFakeorg. Marwan Crady, he's the Dean and CEO of Northwestern University in Qatar. And Justine Sola is the head of Misinformation Policy at Facebook. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you on board. Olga, I'm going to begin with you, if that's okay. Tell us about what StopFakeorg is and what you do. Obviously, the name is self-explanatory, but I'm curious what steps your organization takes to do its work.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And yes, 7 years ago, in 2014, unmarked Russian soldiers illegally invaded Crimean Peninsula, and at the same time, a lot of fake news about Ukraine emerged in the informational space. So it were blatant lies, outright lies. So we were shocked. I mean Ukrainian honest journalists. And then a group of journalists, including me, started a website to investigate this fake news. And the main goals were there, three of them. To gather all the false news about Ukraine in one place, show in detail how we refuted them and increase the media literacy of our audience in this way. And when accumulated a large amount of material, we show that this problem really exists and show its real scale. And it was 7 years ago. No one of the team believed that this initiative would last that long, because now we celebrated 7 years, and we just responded to the challenges of the time. And in fact, we have created a trend of using fact-checking to reveal foreign disinformation in Ukraine in particular. And we collected irrefutable evidence of a complex system of Russian disinformation, false news, using false news for creating this disinformation campaigns, and we raised awareness of this problem internationally. So, yes. And now we have more than 4,000 refuted false news about Ukraine on our website, and most of them are created by the Russian media, both state and privately owned. And we analyzed the main narratives behind them and identified 18 such narratives. These are narratives of discrediting the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian reforms, messages about Ukraine as a fascist state and the failed state, and so on.
That's really good to know, Olga. I'm going to bring in Justine. Justine, you run misinformation policy for Facebook. I know our viewers want to hear about that, but I also have to ask, there are people like you who have titles such as yours, clearly trying to be the solution at Facebook, but Facebook also is the problem, isn't it?
Well, thank you so much, Ravi, for being here, for having me here. I think the way I would sort of explain the basics of our approach is, as you kind of emphasized at the beginning of this talk, fake news is not new. It's been around for hundreds of years, if not longer, at least in print. But we are looking at how the internet and social media can amplify the spread of this information, and what role we can play in coming up with solutions. So there's really a lot of nuance to misinformation and how it spreads. It can spread in advertisements, in user-generated content, in news content. And we really want to look at Facebook and Instagram and our responsibility to addressing this across our platform and specific products. So how does fake news manifest in newsfeed versus Facebook groups, different products. And our approach, the way we describe it is we remove, we reduce, and we inform. So for content or actors who break our rules, our community standards, we remove that content and those actors. We see a lot of false news, fake news is spread by kind of financially motivated spammers and through fake accounts. And so we can look for those fake accounts and take them down without even having to kind of make an assessment of the content itself. So looking at actors and behaviors and inauthentic and coordinated behaviors in particular. We also have rules around removing misrepresentations related to voting and also misinformation that can lead to imminent physical harm, which we really think crosses a line in terms of safety concerns, trumping sort of expression. Of course, there's a ton of other potential, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Justine, that all of that makes sense, but critics will say a lot of these moves are like playing whack-a-mole. It's too little, too late, that the problem tends to metastasize at the speed of the internet, but the response tends to be at the speed of, say, corporate America. So if that's the case, then, is there a technological way for Facebook to change what it does or make it less likely that fake news would proliferate?
Yeah, let me share 2 points on that. So to sort of very quickly wrap up the idea of removing, reducing, and informing, because actually I think the reduce and inform part of our approach really speaks to that challenge of how do you address this problem at scale, given the way information evolves and morphs and the pace. So we work with independent third-party fact checkers to reduce the distribution of content rated false. Something we've thought a lot about. So when fact checkers rate content false, we give it less distribution on newsfeed, and we also inform people with a warning label. So they have more information from a fact checker and can make better decisions about what they want to read the source or they want to share it further. One thing we've seen is that if we will count if someone is repeatedly sharing this kind of false news that's been fact checked by a fact checker, we can give less distribution to all that page's content. So trying to get ahead of the next piece of viral misinformation from spreading. So that's one way we think about kind of that scale challenge. We've also invested a lot through AI in looking for duplicate content. So when a fact checker will rate one piece of content, we can fan out and find exact duplicates of that content. This is sort of a challenge across the content. Photos and videos and text are all different in terms of the technological engineering challenges, but we want to be able to amplify those fact checks so that fact checkers who are professional journalists can really use their time to look at net new claims, and we can use our technology to kind of find all the same content, reduce its distribution, put labels on it. But there are also we need additional supplementary solutions as well. So when we talk about our inform work, I think a real area of investment and learning for us in the last year in particular has been thinking about how we can ourselves and in partnership with others promote authoritative information. So while we're focused on both reducing the bad and the spread of misinformation, amplify the good and kind of flood the zone with credible sources. So we've created things like a COVID information center that puts the latest information from trusted news outlets, government health authorities in one place for people to find. We did something similar in the US election with a voting information center. And we also have a climate science information center. And so sort of looking at that kind of holistic approach, both reducing the good and promoting the bad, reducing the bad and promoting the good is really crucial, I think, to getting at this very tough problem from many, many angles.
Sure. I'm going to come back to you with more, but I want to bring in Marwan. It's so great that we have perspectives from the US, from Ukraine, from the EU. Marwan, you're in the Middle East, in Qatar, of course, but you also oversee programs across the Global South. So I'm curious for your perspective of how misinformation and disinformation is spread in the Middle East and other parts of the world that we're yet to discuss here. You've, of course, written extensively about this. Your thoughts?
Yes, so misinformation, disinformation, fake news is a huge problem all over the world. In the Middle East alone, for example, we have several studies over the last few years from Northwestern Qatar that give you an idea of the size, the scale of the problem. About 3/4 of Arabs in multiple countries they've seen news that looks completely made up. We have research that shows that emotions are a serious catalyst for fake news, so that when you have negative content, if in fake news, it drives virality, but real news, it has to be positive for it to go viral. It's a very complicated scene, right? So why and how does fake news spread in the Global South? So, it's about, first of all, actors that use emotionally stirring words and images. It's about using historically and socially resonant events. So if you have a rivalry between two countries that started a couple of centuries ago, you can find a gap in any narrative and latch onto it a bunch of fake news that fulfill your own geopolitical agenda, whether you're trying to push a border or there's a trade war, so on and so forth. And third, I think we see a lot of trickery and creativity, right? In the way that some actors spread fake news. I call it cats and sports. ISIS at some point had pictures of cats in their social media feeds because somehow cats attract people. They used hashtags for the Olympics, for the World Cup, right? The kinds of hashtags that attract a different kind of people. And this is going to accelerate, I think, more and more in the age of deep fake. So I think there are three issues. I call them three domains. The three S's, there's speed, right? The speed with which we can now channel and circulate information is unprecedented, even though fake news has existed for as long as communication and language have existed. We have scale. Again, the scale, a single tweet can go global immediately. And then we have systems. In other words, we have machines, we have algorithms, we have platforms, and not enough people to do the human authentication process that I believe is necessary for this to change, right? So in combination, these three S's, I think, is where the crux of the problem lies.
I'm going to move very soon now to questions from our audience, but Justine, I'd love for you to riff off of what Marwan just said, because he was pointing out that it's more likely that the things that would go viral tend to be things that are sensationalistic or playing to emotions in some way, or imagery that is emotive, and a lot of times these things can be doctored or fake, whereas things that are a little bit more down the middle, less likely to go viral. And a big part of this, of course, is the very nature of what social media is and what it does. So aren't these oppositional forces, I guess is what I'm getting at, for someone like you, doing admirable work within Facebook, but how do you square that circle?
When we think about sort of the content to show people, I think one principle to keep in mind is we are trying to show people what is relevant to them, and prioritize content from friends and family. So we're really giving people a lot of control in terms of what they want to see and follow. We also layer on top of that sort of steps to reduce the spread of sort of problematic low quality content. So we will give less distribution to clickbait or engagement bait, sort of tactics we see that are we know people don't want to see in their news feeds. So that's some of the ways we think about sort of content ranking.
Can I ask how you decide that? And I'm curious because, I mean, obviously some of the most popular websites in the world are clickbait. So how do you end up deciding what to promote and what not to?
Again, so for largely, we're looking at what is relevant to people and what they have chosen to like and follow and connect with. And when we develop policies around any area, and clickbait in particular goes sort of a bit beyond the scope of the focus of my work, but we consult with a large number of people externally to understand problematic content. We listen to what people are telling us in terms of what they want to see, and then we try to be very transparent about our rules, so people know what our rules are and can stay within the lines.
Got it. Olga, let me ask you about what journalists can do, and obviously you have experience as a journalist, and now you work for StopFakeorg. What is the most important thing that journalists and consumers should do to build resilience against misinformation?
I think that the first recommendation for journalists my recommendation is to check the information. It's very simple, but unfortunately, not all of them do this. Everything must be checked. And second is to promote fact-checking and to report, not just fact-checking, but media literacy, how this information world works. And to report about disinformation issues, for example, how disinformation can affect the results of election, or it's a matter of survival for honest journalism, because a lot of people get their news now, the information from not from journalists, but from bloggers, from from clickbait websites without any journalistic approach. So it's actually vital for us, for journalists, to educate our audiences in this way and to explain them why our work is important. And it doesn't matter whether it's global media outlet or just a niche website. And the next, I also recommend to think about narratives, about the power of narratives. Simply refuting fakes now is not enough. We understand, we realize this. And it's important to think about what narrative we offer instead. It's also useful for journalists who cover information to think about what narratives they are building. It's not about being silent, by no means. All important information for the public should be made public. But the same information can be published in very different ways. And this is where narratives are worth thinking about.
Sure. I want to bring back...
just report a meaningful information in an attractive way, not just...
Right.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, Olga. I want to bring back in Annelies Riles. We don't have too much time left, and I want to bring in some of our excellent audience questions. And I'm going to put this one from Joseph Tully to Marwan. And the question is, how can we effectively educate the public? So ordinary people, not journalists this time. How do we educate ordinary people to be more skeptical and decipher the differences between fake news and substantive news?
So I don't think there's a technical solution. There's an immediate solution in terms of learning a specific base of knowledge to be able to do this. I do think sort of the traditional systems of learning, the humanities, the social sciences, are very important for people to learn to understand context, right? Because we need the social context, the emotional drivers of misinformation to be understood. We also need solutions that are broader than just the classroom, right? Or the seminar. If scale is a problem, localize it. If speed is a problem, slow it down. If systems are a problem, humanize the process, right? And education is extremely important. Think of Plato's cave allegory, right? You have people chained in front of a wall, there's a fire behind them, people pass by, they see shadows on the wall, they think this is reality. We are in Plato's digital cave now, right? And we need to be able to separate the shadows from the reality, and knowing how shadows are formed, knowing how fire works and projects and distorts the shape and the size of people on a wall is what will allow us to ascertain and authenticate the difference between fake and real news.
That's good advice. Annalise, I have a question from John Williams, and he's asking if you see unique threats to the global South and transitioning nations due to fake news.
Well, I would like to punt that question to Marwan, because he's really the expert on that.
Sure, Marwan.
So, clearly there are two issues here. One is that the global South historically has been victim of manipulated information. There's a history in colonial history is one of deploying statistics for specific purposes, right? And we see that all over the global South. At the same time, in the global South, we don't have the kinds of institutions that are well funded to be able to wage a battle against fake news. And this is very important, right? But we also pay the price constantly of previous mistakes, right? The idea that to hunt down Osama bin Laden, there was a fake vaccination drive, means that in Pakistan now, in those areas, people are skeptical of vaccination drives.
Absolutely.
In the times of COVID, this is a tragedy, right? So there is no immediate solution. There are historically sort of aggravating circumstances. And a lot of places in the global South have done very well because they've mobilized, again, the power of community. They've slowed things down. And they've managed better than some of the much richer nations in terms of with COVID, for example. Qatar being a great example.
That's very true, Marwan. I was based in India for a while, and I wrote a book about how India sort of expanded its internet pie mostly through smartphones. And one of the scariest things about that, while it's mostly a good news story, is that for many people, the smartphone is their first camera, it's their first map, it's their first TV, it's their first digital device. And when you put all of these things in one go in people's hands, there's a lot that they don't know, there's a lot that they don't understand. And so education takes on such an important role, much more than it does in the West, because for many people in the global South, it's not an evolution with technology, it's a full revolution. I want to get in a couple more questions that I'm going to put to Justine. There's a lot of interest in Facebook. Frank Bustamante, who's a strategic planner at the Department of Defense in the US, asks, I don't understand how Facebook's third-party fact checkers can review or correct false content in an expeditious manner to have a curing effect. Can you explain how effective this approach is so far? Justine, as you think about that, one more question adding to that, Julian Wright, he says, Justine mentioned that Facebook consults with others about misinformation. So the question is, how do you decide who to consult with? And what does that process look like? Justine.
Thanks for the questions. So fact checking is one part of our approach. I think I wouldn't want to say it's a silver, it's the only solution. So again, just underscoring the importance of many prongs in digital literacy and these partnerships. One thing we have seen with fact checking is that when we looked into this, I think about a year ago now, looked at the fact checking labels and people's behavior, we did see that 95% of the time when people saw a fact check label on content, they did not go ahead and click through to the content. So that's a really positive signal. That kind of friction is changing behavior. On the second question of how do we decide who to partner with, we really reach out to a range of organizations, to civil society organizations around the world. We have dedicated team members whose job it is to engage and listen and talk to academic experts, talk to people who are on the ground in different parts of the world, so that we're really taking that global feedback into account as we develop our policies and as we understand how speech is changing, how misinformation trends are changing, and uniquely manifesting in different places. So there's a really huge range of partnerships.
I just want to follow up on that because David Crow in Vancouver had a question that went along the lines of asking, about the interaction between fake news monitoring and algorithms. He says, to what extent can algorithms contribute to the filtering? How much of it is human? How much of it is algorithms?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, we use machine learning to help us try to find misinformation and surface that to fact-checking partners. So we look at a number of different signals to train those classifiers, including signals from users, from people who are reporting to us. Something may be false news. We can look at sort of actors who have previously shared content rated false and use that as a signal. And then we prioritize that for fact checkers who then have discretion about what they choose to rate and review, really based on their journalistic expertise.
Understood. Another couple of quick questions. I'm going to put this to Annalise and Marwan. Jump in if you'd like to take it, either one of you. Kenneth Lehman says, we've talked a lot about standards, but what about consequences? Do you need consequences, like specific responses that have teeth to stop and prevent people from proliferating disinformation in the future? And Nicholas Ashford from MIT asks about citizen juries and public commissions. In addition to strengthening fact-checking, he's asking, do you need those sorts of so-called experts, citizen juries? Annalise, Marwan, either one of you?
Well, on the citizen juries, maybe I'll take that piece and let Marwan take the hard one about consequences. Definitely, we need citizen juries, in my view. And this is something at Buffett that we're really focusing on right now, which is how to create a conversation between the experts, folks like Justine, and ordinary folks that is meaningful and focused enough that it produces results. And we just don't have those platforms yet, I think, to do that effectively. But actually, I think this is a place where universities are really poised to lead, because we're used to taking ordinary folks and turning them into experts. That's what we do at universities. And so we're the translators, in a sense, between those two groups to begin with. And we're very locally grounded, but we're globally networked. And so we can create that sort of global conversation between experts and citizens that we need. And this is so important because people are not going to, getting the news right is one thing, but getting people to believe it's right is a separate thing. In other words, trust is just as critical as truth here. And that's not going to come unless people have a sense that the process is there and that they can believe in the process and be part of it.
That's a very good point you raised. Trust in the media in general has also been declining. So I imagine that's a factor. Marwan?
Yeah, very, very briefly, I think there's a fundamental tension between growth, the sort of growth at almost any cost that a lot of the platforms have, and the truth. And I think consequences, unfortunately, in my opinion, can only come through regulation. The problem is that we're talking about very global tech companies, and we're talking about legal regulatory responses that are at best regional. So Facebook paying News Corp to be able to operate in Australia is really, is moving the problem elsewhere.
Yeah, but that said, just to close out, Marwan, to Vice President Jourova's point that Facebook is now saying it would welcome regulation, or it needs regulation. Do you buy that?
I don't know. I mean, past performance is that there are always loopholes in any regulations. And we have companies whose economic and social and cultural power is such that they can find these loopholes. I would welcome a new sort of really good faith effort to work together with regulators, but I think the future is up for grabs on this.
Up for grabs indeed, and a very important conversation to have. Justine, did you want to jump in at the end? Go for it.
Well, I don't need to have the last word. I did want to say that the idea of growth at any cost, I just want to push back that really isn't what is motivating us. We're looking at what is good for people. And one of the messages I always want to leave with people about fake news is that it is not good for our platforms. And so we're really taking aggressive steps to address it, and then reinforce the point that we do believe that some of these decisions should not be solely in a technology company's hands. So again, are engaging with governments to think about smart regulation going forward.
Yeah, Justine, that's a fair point to make. And I hear you. I think social media companies get maligned a fair bit, and it's hard to figure out intent on anyone's part, but I do think the effect is important to discuss, and certainly the effect of many social media companies around the world. We've all seen this. It's done good, but it's also impacted people adversely in many ways. And that's why we're here today, and that's why, it's important to figure out solutions that, are not isolated to one country or one region, but wider regulations that apply, and that also to stop and assess the fact that, the progress the world has made over the last decade is just incredible in the span of the history of the world. And so, for us to be able to stop, assess that, and try and understand what guardrails need to be put in place to make this new era that we're in, where information can be shared so easily, so quickly around the world, how to deal with that. Justina Sola, Head of Misinformation Policy at Facebook, thank you for being with us. Marwan Kredi, Dean and CEO of Northwestern University in Qatar. Olga Yurkova, the co-founder of StopFakeorg, and of course, Annalise Raz. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. I thank you for your time. That was a very interesting conversation, and we got lots of questions and feedback from our viewers around the world. Unfortunately, we do have to end it there. So to everyone who's joined us, thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. A big thanks as well to Northwestern University's Buffett Institute for Global Affairs for partnering with us on convening this very important dialogue. We've barely just scratched the surface, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Please stay tuned for much more to come from FP, including a virtual dialogue next week on Afghanistan and the pivotal decision regarding US troop withdrawals, which may force a reckoning with America's endless wars. Another very timely and important topic. You can find out more on foreignpolicy.com/events. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. I learned a lot. Take care and see you very soon.